And we're going to start with LSU staff. And we talked a little bit about it last week whenever Brian Kelly and the Tigers officially announced Matt House. Now they have officially announced the offensive coordinator. And we also have a couple of reports to get to about other staffers to join. But let's start with Mike Denbrock. And obviously this has been rumored for a very long time, actually a pretty bad kept secret, that Mike Denbrock was going to be the guy. And as soon as Cincinnati lost to Alabama on Friday, you knew it was only a matter of time. Sunday, it was made official. And first and foremost, when you talk about Mike Denbrock, before you talk about all the success he's had on the field, which there is plenty, you talk about the relationship with Brian Kelly, and that's a pretty long one, too, that goes back to the late 80s at Grand Valley State.
That's right. Spent 7 years coaching with Brian Kelly. Saw him at Grand Valley State, like you said, from 92 to 98, then 7 seasons in Notre Dame from 2010 to 2016. And kind of the rise of Cincinnati Musso, Mike Denbrock has been a big part of it since 2017. He's been there all 5 years since he left Notre Dame. And he's been there every single year that Luke Fickell has. So again, big part of the rise at that university that was in the college football playoff. Look, they didn't perform very well against Alabama, but really, what did you expect? On paper, it looks like a good hire. He's had a lot of success going back since 1992 was the first time he called plays, and a lot of experience with Brian Kelly. So this looks good on paper. Once again, a lot like we talked about with Matt House. Let's see how he makes the transition from Cincinnati over to LSU.
So obviously, familiarity with Brian Kelly is a huge thing, and that's something I like. I mean, you want a guy who obviously is going to be comfortable with. Mike Denbrock seems like that guy. Another thing I like, the success that Mike Denbrock has had with the tight end position. That's a position that LSU's been trying to grow here over the past few years. You kind of saw it take the next step, or at least you thought you did, with Thad Moss in 2019. Bring in Eric Gilbert. We all know how that panned out. You were really thin at that position this year, although Jack Best did some really nice things. You saw Cole Taylor have a few moments, and you even saw Jack Mashburn do really well, at least in the run blocking game. So I'm excited to see the next step that position can take under Mike Denbrock, because, man, he's Kyle Rudolph. I mean, that's a guy he's really had. He's had Mackey finalists as well in his time at Notre Dame. So I'm excited about that. And the ability that his teams have shown to run the ball is something I like a lot too. And that goes hand in hand with Brian Kelly's ability to develop offensive line. For what it's worth, Mike Denbrock will be OC and probably coach tight ends at LSU. It's the same role he had at Cincinnati. It's a role he had at Notre Dame for a little bit as well. Now, when you talk more about on the field, what he's done, go back to last year. And as you said, big part of Cincinnati's success, a top 20 total offense in 2020, 18th in pass efficiency, 10th in scoring offense. They were, 15th in scoring offense. This year, they were 10th in scoring offense. Set school records for touchdowns, points scored, yards per play, and were among nation's leader in the points per game at 37. So, I mean, look, I know it didn't go great on Friday against Alabama, but let's let him get in here, get working with LSU's talent, because when they were playing a schedule equal to theirs at Cincinnati, you just heard the numbers that they had offensively. So let him get in there, get some talent equal to that, and let's see how he goes. I think right now, man, it's a really good hire, and I'm going to go off the larger sample size than what they did in one game against a vastly superior opponent.
And there's another coach that was in demand by other SEC schools. We talked about Matt House drawing interest from other schools in the conference, and although it's Vanderbilt, they did try to hire Mike Denbrock last year. He chose to stay at Cincinnati, although he did interview with the Commodores, and now it looks like it's paid off for him as he's getting the job with LSU. But one thing that people have been mentioning, I know Hunt was talking about it, is kind of his journey at Notre Dame and the fact that he left the Fighting Irish back in 2016 after they went 4-8. And it's interesting when you look at his resume. He was at Notre Dame for a few years with Brian Kelly, like we mentioned, but in 2015, he had a title change. He wasn't the OC by title, but according to Brian Kelly in some interviews from back then, he was still calling the plays. It was just a different title. Again, they go 4-8 in 2016, and after that, according to some reports, again from back then, Brian Kelly was going to strip Denbrock of play calling duties, but he chose to leave and not stay at Notre Dame and get demoted, and look at the success that he's had at Cincinnati ever since. So kind of the point that I'm trying to make is I know a lot of people are worried about Brian Kelly's offenses maybe not being modern enough, and I know that it's kind of been a weird journey with Mike Denbrock, but you can't deny that he definitely bounced back at Cincinnati. You ran through all the stats right there. You saw the team success that Cincinnati had under Denbrock, and I think his offense is plenty modern. You saw what he did with Spencer Ritter and those boys. So I think that the fans that are worried about Brian Kelly in that sense hopefully have some concerns alleviated with Mike Denbrock coming to town.
on paper, I mean, look, now you have both of them. You have Matt House, you have Mike Denbrock, both in the boat now. On paper, it looks like two really, really good coordinator hires. Now, we'll have to wait and see how it plays out when the season gets started here next fall. But we talked a lot about Brian Kelly's acumen in hiring coaches and great assistants that move on to the next level or to be head coaches or maybe even to the NFL ranks. Right now, it looks like he's got two of those guys in the boat in Matt House and Mike Denbrock. Now, again, we'll see how it plays out, but you'll have Dinbrock doing offensive coordinator and tight ends, what it looks like, at least for now, and then you'll have Matt House doing defensive coordinator and linebacker. So, obviously, people are going to ask about quarterbacks coach and defensive line coach, and over the weekend, you saw multiple outlets report, Pete Thamel of Yahoo Sports, who had it first, but that Joe Sloan, former offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at Louisiana Tech, is expected to be added to LSU as the quarterback coach, and Jamar Cain as defensive line coach and a defensive run game coordinator. Jamar Cain, of course, comes from Oklahoma, was set to take a job with Lincoln Riley at USC, but that has since gone by the wayside, and he is expected to join Brian Kelly's staff in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, and apparently he even changed like his social media graphics to show that he was going to USC, but somewhere along the line he decided to not follow Lincoln Riley, and now he's coming to LSU. He's coached some really good players at Oklahoma and throughout his time at Arizona State and Fresno State as well. But honestly, just on paper, if you're just looking at the resume, I thought Andre Carter had a better one. I think he's still going to have success down the road. But again, this is what happens when you bring in a new coach. The familiarity with a lot of people are going to play a big factor when it comes to making these hires. So he's had some success there. He's coached some really good individual players, and let's see how he does. But again, I thought Andre Carter did a really good job with this past defensive line.
Andre Carter did a really good job. I do like the decision around Jamar Cain though as well, man. I mean, Oklahoma, I know you look at their defense, and plenty of people do, and it's never really positive thoughts surrounding there. But you brought it up, some of the guys he's coached, like Ronnie Perkins, who Oklahoma's defense might not be very good, but I don't think you're going to hear anybody say too many bad things about Ronnie Perkins' ability on a football field, especially rushing the passer. So that's somebody that Jamar Cain, and look, man, he's known as a great recruiter as well. So you can never have too many of those on your staff. That's the same thing you kind of look at with Joe Sloan for the potential at quarterback coach there. Somebody who's spent a lot of time with Skip Holtz at Louisiana Tech, was the offensive coordinator the past 2 years, but had been on staff with Skip Holtz since 2013, 35 years old, so young, up and coming, and a primary recruiter for La Tech. So that's another guy locally here in Louisiana with strong recruiting ties. So you look at those two hires there, or potential hires, not official yet, with Joe Sloan for the quarterback's coach job and Jamar Cain as defensive line coach, and recruiting is definitely at the center of both of those.
Your boy in the chat actually makes a pretty good point. I don't agree with it, but I'm happy that he brought it up. He's saying that we slammed O for hiring his old buddies, but we're applying Brian Kelly for doing the same thing. The difference is Bo Pelini was not coaching the college football playoff, and again, these guys were in demand. Matt House was almost hired by some SEC schools, or at least he drew interest. Denbrock has drawn a lot of interest, I'm sure. He only interviewed with Vanderbilt, but I'm sure other people have been interested in him. I mean, his teams have had some of the best offenses in the last 5 seasons. He just helped take the first group of 5 team ever to the college football playoffs. So yes, there's some familiarity with some of these hires, but the track records are not comparable to the guys that Ohio.
I think that's important. Also, I mean, look, I fully expected this conversation to come up when talking about this. I'm not sure I slammed O for this, but I mean, I think when you look at coaches hiring other coaches, you see this more often than not, the familiarity. So, I mean, it's not really surprising that Coach O would have done that, or that Brian Kelly's done that, or I mean, that really anyone has done that. That's what you work in relationships in the coaching industry. You're obviously going to hire somebody you're familiar with, that you've worked with in the past, that you've had success with in the past. I think maybe that could be a difference. I don't know. Again, I don't really remember slamming Coach O for this. If you can find it, sure. I mean, it's archived somewhere if I did. I don't remember doing that. I expect this in coaching hires. I mean, even a head coaching hire, you'll see guys work for, or go after guys they've had interaction with at previous schools. I mean, look at Scott Woodward and Jimbo Fisher, for God's sake. I mean, so look, if you want to go down that road, I mean, I'm sure we can, but if you're going to go down it with if you're going to go down with Brian Kelly, you're going to have to go down it with just about every head coach, because that's just kind of how this works.
Yeah, for sure. And it just seems to be a little bit more organized here. Again, they struck out on Tommy Reese, and maybe arguably Denbrock has an even better track record so far than him. But it just seems like much more of a progress move. So it doesn't seem like they're just calling somebody, first-hand accounts, second-hand accounts. It seems like a long, drawn-out, thought-out process with Brian Kelly, but it also just seems a lot more organized. And again, yes, there is a lot of familiarity there, but these guys have much better resumes. And so far, Mike Denbrock and House, both at least on paper, look like really good hires. And at the end of the day, all these coaches, including Brian Kelly, came here to coach better players. And now that they get that opportunity, you see the potential and you see why a lot of people are excited. But on the surface, man, I would say that House and Denbrock both look like excellent hires.